Welcome along to Tweet Street Scotland Occupied. Home of the satirical saltire. I'm Cinnamon Bridges, aka Peter. And tonight we've got a special event going on. We have Alba Youth candidates who are running for council. So it's Scotland's Future Now that we've titled this event. We will be speaking to each candidate individually, and then we'll set up a panel where we'll ask them questions about why they're running and so on and so forth. We hope you enjoy the offerings. So first of all, we'll start with Councillor Lee Wilson. So Lee, if you can just introduce yourself, in which you're running and why you're rerunning for council.
Well, thank you very much. I'm Lee Wilson, the Alba Party local government convener, currently a sitting councillor in Aberdeenshire. So I'm in a slightly different position to the other candidates on the call here, that I'm an incumbent. So I'm not seeking election for the first time, I'm seeking re-election. And a number of factors came into consideration when I decided to stand again, largely because I think I've got a good record to run again on. In fact, very recently, what I've been doing is chasing up compensation claims, unpaid compensation claims from Storm Arwen back in November. SEN hadn't yet paid some of the outstanding compensation claims, particularly to people in rural areas, like parts of the country in Aberdeenshire that I represent. So I've been chasing that up. They've now got their compensation in. So that's a significant achievement, in my opinion, that I can sell on the doorsteps. But we are fielding candidates in the Alba Party across the country. And of course, Scotland's a very diverse country. It looks very different in parts of it. Rural Aberdeenshire is very different to Glasgow, for example, so the needs are different. And one of the things we'll talk about later on in the programme is poverty. Now, when people think about poverty, they often think about poverty in urban areas. But in more rural areas, like in Aberdeenshire, poverty can often go hidden. And that's something I don't think is spoken enough about. So it's something that we need to focus on. And certainly it's something that I'll be focusing on in my campaign.
Thank you very much, Lee. We'll go over to Robert Reid. Robert, just introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I'm Robert Reid, and I'm standing to be a candidate in Aberdeen City in the Tillydrone seat in Old Aberdeen ward. Why I want to be a councillor? I have to be honest, it's never something that I've always ever planned to do or wanted to do. I never particularly wanted to get into frontline politics. There's many reasons for that. But I think it's come to a point now, particularly within the independence movement and the place we are within the Alba Party, that I think this election is so important for Scotland and for the city of Aberdeen. I think when you look at what's happening in Aberdeen currently, you have the Labour Party in coalition with the Tories. And then down in Edinburgh, you've got the Greens and the SNP in power together. You see communities like mine and Tillydrone Seaton in particular, over the last decade have been continually getting poorer and poorer, while richer areas in Aberdeen are being richer and richer. And so for the voters in Tillydrone Seaton, Old Aberdeen, I don't feel like they have an alternative. They have nothing else. They can't vote for the SNP or the Greens. It's the status quo, same with the Labour Party and the Tory Party. So I thought, my community, I wanted someone that I could vote for an alternative. And when nobody was coming forward, I thought, well, do you know what, I'm going to do it myself.
Well done, Robert. Thanks very much. And we'll come over next to Lisa Keogh, who's joining us all the way from another country today.
Hi, Peter. Thank you. Yeah, I'm in Manchester. The reason I'm running for council is it was something that I actually wanted to do. I wanted to do a bit of good in the community. I want to help the children that are in poverty. And recently, well, actually not so recently now, but a year ago, I realised that women's rights were under threat. So I think I want to highlight that and try and do something about that as well. But I think my main thing really is the poverty. As a child growing up in poverty, I know what it's like, and I know that some of these children and families don't have hope, and I would like to be the person that gives them that bit of hope and helps to make positive changes towards giving them a better future.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Lisa. Next we'll come to Hector MacLeod. Hector, over to you.
Hi, my name's Hector McLeod, and I'm going to be a Alba Party candidate in the Elna ward up in Skye and Razy. I believe as a candidate, I'll bring a fresh, young energy to the council and an alternative approach to some of the issues facing the people of Skye and Razy. I bring honesty and openness to members in the ward. I'll happily admit I'm not going to have all the answers or sometimes knowledge to concerns and issues raised by members, but what I would promise is to listen to these issues and concerns, do my research and seek advice from people that do have knowledge and expertise in whatever area is relevant. My main local policy I'll be standing on is the current housing crisis in Scotland, but in particular in Skye and Razy. I believe this housing crisis has placed us in the middle of the second Highland clearances, and if it's not urgently addressed, it's going to become irreversible and it won't be long before the clearance is complete. My other policies will be on tourism and getting the balance right. We're seeing a continued rise in Skye and Razy of being a popular tourist destination, and I feel it's important to get that balance right. I believe it's a good thing because it brings a lot of funding to the local economy and creates a lot of jobs, but we also need to make sure that Skye and Razy residents don't pay a high price for this rise in tourism. We'd also look to raise the issue of the state of our roads. Up in Skye, we've got a saying that in the UK, you drive on the left of the road. On Skye, we drive on what's left of the road. I'm working on a policy, but still gathering a bit of information and in discussions with some businesses on it. So I don't want to say too much more than that, but I do hope to say more sometime soon. And I just want to finish off by saying, I actually believe the councillors we have in Skye at the moment have done a good job and they should be credited for the job they've been doing. But I know one is stepping down at this election. So my message to the Skye and Razy residents would be, and I'm a football fan, so it's a bit football related. We have a potential winning team in this ward, but it's the 80th minute and we need a super striker to come on to win the match, or if you prefer, a solid defender to play the game out. So if you elect me on May the 5th, I will be your fresh, energised super sub that makes sure Skye and Razy win. Thanks.
Brilliant, thanks very much, Hector. And finally, we'll go to Scott Fallon. Over to you, Scott, to introduce yourself, please, and why you're standing.
Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Scott. I've been endorsed to stand in the Lower Bray, which is part of Falkirk. A great community, certainly an area where I've grown up for the vast majority of my life. So it's be standing kind of in an area where my parents still live, the majority of my friends still live. It'd be an incredible privilege to be able to kind of stand up and say, I am your local councillor in that area. So about it myself, kind of very target driven, like achieving for people. So for me, if I was to be successful, knowing that I could go out there and helping my friends and family and community with issues that are impacting them, it would certainly be a great drive and something that I find myself to be quite good at to then go and do for them. I think with Alba, certainly I feel my values align with the party. I am very focused on independence. I've been campaigning ever since about 2012, I think, probably, for independence. You'll probably see me at the march in 2 weeks' time, I think it is, in Paisley. So very independence focused. Obviously very in favour for women's rights as well, and so many other more policies we have. So really looking forward to the next hour or so on the call as well.
Thanks very much, Scott. That's a very good introduction from each of you. Folks, I would like to try and open up the debate. If you can all unmute yourself and just chat freely about the stance that you have towards poverty and also the Alba Party's stance on it, and why you feel it's of importance in Scotland and for the Alba Party today. So I'll open up, ladies first. Lisa, if you want to give a wee contribution and you can try and get it going.
Yeah, so I was having this discussion today with a lady in a shop. We were talking about food banks and the growing amount of people that are using them. And, you know, it's not a credit to Scotland that we've got these food banks. It's actually something we should be hanging our heads in shame about. We should not be at a point where families are relying on going to these places for food. I mean, I always buy a little bit of extra when I'm in Tesco's and I put it in the Tesco basket. We shouldn't have to do that. We shouldn't be at a point where other people are relying on us to feed them because the wages are so low and whatever other reasons are causing poverty. I think that that's not a credit to Scotland at all.
Just anybody feel free to take up the
You're absolutely correct, Lisa. Lisa is from a similar, or lives in a similar area to mine in Angus, similarly where I'm from in Aberdeenshire. The issues are the same. And I think what's happened is that the pandemic has really exacerbated poverty in many areas to such an extent that people are now, or so many people unfortunately, are relying on food banks and food pantries. Now, in a country as wealthy as Scotland, that is obscene. Now, being from the northeast of Scotland that has had an abundance of wealth through the oil industry, it's a travesty that that wealth has not trickled down to the communities that it should. Areas in Rob's ward, for example, like Tillydrone and Seaton, with areas of mass deprivation. It's shocking. This is the oil capital of Europe, and we should not have those levels of poverty in it.
Yeah, I completely agree. And on that point, on Tillydrone and Seaton, my ward, if anyone's ever been in Aberdeen, they'll know that the kind of Seaton towers, they get called the skyscrapers, are big tower blocks right on the coastfront. And from the very top of them, you'll be able to look out to the North Sea and see a whole wide range of wind turbines producing renewable energy for this country. And at the same time, these people who are in the poorest 10% of Scotland, will be having to pay up to 50% more on their energy bills. I mean, it's incredible how we've got to this situation. And that's why, another reason why I think the Alba Party is such a fantastic alternative to the ones we have currently, because we are a really poverty-driven party. If you look to our 5-point plan to tackle child poverty, I think it's fantastic points on there that can really make a difference at really quite a low cost. And then if you look at the qualities committee that we have now putting out this 5-point plan to tackle inequalities in society, I would encourage anyone to go onto on Twitter or the Alba Party website and look at these points and see how big a difference this can make to their communities.
Yeah, I think I agree with what Lisa said, that the fact we have food banks in Scotland is absolutely shameful. And one thing that really annoys me is when I see politicians getting pictures taken at food banks. Politicians should be ashamed to even step foot in these food banks. I think there's a wee bit councillors can do, there's a wee bit MSPs can do, but if we really want to eradicate food banks, we are going to need full independence for that.
There's an interesting point, actually. Yeah, no, there was a really good point on Tuesday's call where someone had actually mentioned that what they felt was an impact to kind of poverty, especially food poverty, was unfortunately a lack of education on actually how to make a substantial meal. I think back to when I was in high school in home economics, we didn't really do a huge amount, to be honest. And it wasn't until I was in my kind of early 20s when I started making more substantial meals that could also be kind of cost effective if needed as well. So I'd be really quite keen to see what we could do to kind of have more educational or more, material out there for people, that instead of, because a takeaway, at least if you're getting a takeaway, a parent might think my kid will eat tonight, but that could be £25 per takeaway, which of course is a huge amount of money if it's added up over time. Whereas if we have more material online and easily accessible, you potentially can feed a family for a fraction of that price. I can probably guarantee it'd be a lot better for them health-wise as well.
Aye, thanks very much, each of you, for the contributions there. And we'll just pick up on a point that Scott actually mentioned there, and about education and how to feed yourself properly and what's good for you, what you can use if you're making a meal at home, how you can transfer it into some sort of different meal for the next night with any leftovers. So a wee bit of education is key. And talking about education and some standards, Eileen, have you got something you want to come in and ask with? Just unmute yourself, please.
Right. I was listening with interest. Was it Hector was talking about Sky, was it? And like more clearances. Housing is not just a problem, you know, in rural areas. A couple of years back, I was speaking to a caseworker in the homeless team in Glasgow, and she was on her knees. She was telling me, that, you know, at that time that they had 800 people who were sleeping on the streets and no way of housing them. There was no more council housing in Glasgow. That had all gone away. And they were basically relying on the private sector. And the private sector charges housing benefit, higher rates of rent, kind of thing. There's less to go along. And the thing that shocked me was she'd said that an 18-year-old girl had turned up at Centre Street, you know, that was the homeless place was in Glasgow. And her situation was that her mum had died, her dad had a new girlfriend who was only a few years older than her, and basically she got kicked out of the house. And all they could do was hand her a sleeping bag, a Mars bar, a packet of crisps, a bottle of water, and tell her, go and follow that guy there. He'll take you to underneath the Kingston Bridge. There's a few people sleeping there. You should be quite safe. Now, in a country like Scotland, that is absolutely, totally unacceptable. That's putting 18-year-old girls and boys, our youth, at risk of being abused, at risk of being murdered, anything, right? And they're on the streets. And I would say that, you know, after COVID, right, we're not through it yet, and with everything else that's going on, this has to stop. We need to get people a roof over their heads. They deserve a roof over their heads. If they have a place to stay and they haven't got a job, they can at least start to address all of those other issues. So it's not just in the rural areas that there is a problem. It's a problem throughout Scotland, the lack of quality council house or public sector housing, right? And the private sector can't take up the slack on it now. It can't.
Thanks, Eileen. Yeah, so that goes to show, it even touches back to what Councillor Lee Wilson was saying in his opening, that as it's the full of the country, and when you take into consideration the wealth that this wee country has, it's even more appalling. I mean, we had some members of the Alba Youth on a few weeks back, Robert and Christina had done a podcast with us, and we were talking about it's not just in the built up cities, it's all the way throughout Scotland.
Yeah.
And when you think of the value that this wee country and the money that it generates with renewable energy, with oil previously, to see the country in the state that it's in is quite concerning. And I think it's quite refreshing that the Alba Party are launching, and that we've got, and I take this as a compliment when I say we've got younger people that are actually seeing the same issues that the older generation are trying to fight against.
They are our lifeblood, to be
Yep.
honest with you. Right? We have got to have the young people on board with this, because what I'm seeing is very frightening.
Yeah.
I'm seeing us going back to Thatcherism, right? And all the horrors that we had during the early 1980s with the deindustrialisation of Scotland.
Yeah.
Right. And us not being told about, you know, the Macron report or anything else like that. And England and the southeast were just using that wealth to do whatever they wanted. And when you take a look at pictures of schemes in Scotland at that time, all you saw was Vanguard after Vanguard, you know, over houses kind of thing, everywhere. And I'm honest to God seeing it going back that way, and it is frightening the life out of me. And I'm so pleased to see that these young people are coming on board with the same thing and seeing the same things that us with older heads are seeing too.
Thanks again, Eileen. So with that in mind then, Hector, we'll come to you first on this. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, just when I mentioned the Highland clearances, I was just referring to the Skye situation. I
Yeah.
totally realise there's an issue throughout Scotland, and it is shameful and disgraceful as well. I think the first thing we've got to do to address this is take it away from the centralisation of government to be making the decisions, because I think we're going to solve the housing in Skye different to how we're going to solve the housing in Edinburgh to how we're going to solve it in Aberdeen. I think we need to give more powers back to local authorities to fix the housing in their local areas. They're the ones with the most knowledge of their areas and how best it'll work.
Yep. And I just open up, so feel free for somebody just to chip in with that.
No,
I
There you go, Lee.
Sorry. I completely agree with Hector's comments. We need to decentralise. We need to empower local authorities, because sadly local authorities have been hollowed out for a number of years now. And it's those local authorities that know exactly how to tackle poverty and know the realities of poverty in their areas. One of the things I think we need to inject into this issue, and I think as the Alba Party has launched, we have done this, is offer a bolder and radical vision. Nothing I can see from any of the other parties goes anywhere near enough, far enough in terms of tackling the scale of poverty in Scotland. So we need a bold vision. I think we've offered that in terms of our 5-point plan for poverty, which, let's remember, if the Scottish Government enacted it in full, would only account for a little over 2% of their overall budget. So we need to look at priorities, and we need to look at the urgency with which this needs to be tackled. Eileen mentioned something interesting a second ago when she spoke about deindustrialisation. And sadly, I think so many of our communities have never fully recovered from that in Scotland. So we need a radical plan for transforming our communities, for decentralising power down from central government to local authorities and handing it back to the people.
Thanks, Lee.
Yeah.
On you go, Robert.
Yeah, I think Eileen's absolutely right. Again, I'd like to reiterate that what everyone else has said, but I think there is only so much the Scottish Parliament can do. It's hamstrung by having the Tories, people like Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg, pulling the strings down from Westminster. And that's probably what builds my frustration up the most when you see Nicola Sturgeon, who's supposed to be the figurehead of this movement, say stuff like, time's on our side. Well, time isn't actually on our side for people that are living under bridges and living in poverty, going to food banks. It's just kicking this independence can down the road only puts these people at the mercy of people like Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg for how much longer? Years? I think that is the fundamental reason why I joined the Alba Party. I think I joined on day one because that frustration for independence, seeing what all the great things we could be doing, and seeing that we aren't doing that because I don't know whether it's not, we don't have the bottle to take this opportunity by both hands and go for it, or we think there's going to be a better time than now. I don't know what the strategy is, but there needs to be urgency in independence debate, and that's certainly the number one theme for any Alba candidate, I think, standing in across Scotland.
Thanks, Robert. Scott, on you go, mate.
Yeah, no, it was a point that Eileen had made actually, and it's something that I've seen depressingly more and more frequently now in social media. There was a post actually just as of last week where unfortunately a girl on Twitter I'd seen had lost possibly a parent or parents, and I believe whoever she rents her house from had kind of said, that's it, we're kicking you out. And there are unfortunately quite a few circumstances where that is happening, and I think there's something we should really be doing about affordable housing in Scotland, because there are, I think now, I've even been looking at trying to get more in place, and you're talking 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 markup in places that the housing market is just that bad just now, and I think certainly for housing poverty in general, we should be doing so much more to tackle that. And even things with the increases of gas and electricity prices as well, that's just not going to help poverty. I think in France, they said to the companies, look, you can put your prices up. I think it was about 3%. I think they said possibly 4%. 4%. We've kind of went to all of us, went, yeah, do what you want, do what you want. So I think it's certainly disappointing to see that because of this government that is in Westminster, probably just as right wing as Thatcher's was, that we are kind of just accepting that we are putting people into poverty, and it's just not acceptable.
Yeah. Lisa, so when you're going to answer this, I would like for you to extend on it, and we'll start going into the topic of women's rights in Scotland. So if you just give us your answer on the poverty, and then just straight into women's rights, and then we'll open up to the rest of the panel. Thank you.
Okay, what sort of women's rights? Just start talking about.
Just your thoughts on how women's rights are in Scotland, what your concerns are. I know that there's been things in the press of late for Women in Scotland, etc. So just even into that. Thank you.
No, I reiterate everything everyone else has said about the poverty, and also I was looking online just at the price of houses out of curiosity for rent, and I mean, you're talking like £700 just for a 2-bedroom like bungalow or flat, and that's probably most people's monthly income. I don't know how people are expected to live like this, so we need to be building more affordable accommodation to fit families. It's just scandalous. The state that we're in, and I think the only way out of this is independence, where we're not beholden to anyone else. And on that, I want to sort of move on to women's rights. In the news recently, they're trying to eradicate the word women. I was reading an article in the Daily Mail, I think it was, and there's a school, I can't remember where it is, I think it's somewhere in England, and now they're saying we don't want children to use the word mum and dad. So they're actually going after the word dad now as well. I know that's England, but they're saying because we want these families, there's families where you've got 2 mums and 2 dads, so they're making these words taboo. You've got the NHS that are removing the word mother, they're removing the word breastfeeding, so we're now having birth givers and chest feeding, and this is also scary. You can't erase women. Every single person in this call has come from a woman, and that's just a matter of fact. We can't erase women from the world.
Excellent, thank you very much, Lisa. And just open up to whoever feels free to go on. You go.
Just obviously Lisa's been in the kind of press for something I think is fantastic, kind of bravery to stand up to Aberdeen University for the stress and everything that she's been put through for saying something as basic as women have vaginas, I think it was. I mean, I can't believe we've got to a situation now where people could be suspended from university and their workplaces for saying something that everyone understands to be true. I think that's where I come at from. Obviously, I'm a guy, but I have a girlfriend, I have a mum, I have a sister, a grandmother. So these things are important. So whenever I hear people say, "Oh, well, it's got nothing to do with you. Why do you talk about it?" I think it's for every man to stand up and say, "Well, look, we have women in our lives as well, and they need to be protected. Their safety should be important." I think on a kind of local issue in my ward, we've got actually quite a lot of very nice green spaces within a relatively small ward, but one of them is called Seaton Park, and there's signs outside it. Seaton Park is kind of located in between the student village and the kind of rest of the ward and university and the main drag. And it says there's a sign outside of it that says, advise women not to walk through at night time. I just can't believe we have areas within our cities where we say women shouldn't be able to go. They should be able to go anywhere at any time, just like anyone else. So I think there certainly needs to be a bit more of a focus on the concerns of women, and any politician that says women's concerns aren't valid, I think it's really quite disgraceful, to be honest.
Who's next?
I absolutely agree, Rob. This is not a left or right issue. It never has been a left or right issue. I'm certainly left of centre and progressive in the modern use of the word. It's about common sense, and it's about right and wrong, and about defending women and being pro-women's rights. I was having a conversation with a friend recently where I asked, I pointed out, it often feels like we've slipped into a parallel universe over the past couple of years, and I asked him how we got here, to which he responded, "Nobody knows, that's the problem." It really is quite strange that we're now criminalising people for standing up for women and being pro-women's rights. It's quite disgraceful.
Do you know what? I think a lot of people didn't realise we were here, though. I know myself personally, while I was at university, I didn't know about any of this until I was asked the question in class. And like I say, I innocently gave an answer, like, a woman is someone with a vagina. Women are not as strong as men, and not all men rape. And I didn't know that there was this sort of this animosity going on behind the scenes. So now I try and bring this conversation up with people every day. I at least try and speak to one person every day about women's rights. And, you know, probably about 80% of women I speak to don't have a clue, like I didn't. They're so busy with their everyday lives, they don't know these things are going on, but men know. And men, they are our allies, and we need men to stand up for women's rights as well. Because I think the thing I find about men is they don't feel the need to be kind. They don't feel the need to appease people's feelings like women do. So men will say it how it is, and men will say, no, that's not a woman. Whereas a woman will be like, oh, hi, woman, sort of thing. So yeah, I think we need men on side.
Well, you've got one here anyway, that's for sure. Scott, over to you.
You know, I think my kind of point goes with what Rob was saying, actually. For me, fundamentally, no matter what happens, it needs to come down to safeguarding. It's got to be, you know, at the forefront of what we do. Possibly a controversial point. When it comes down to me, and a very kind of simplistic, one way or the other, if you're putting someone's physical presence in danger because you're too scared to say something to someone that might upset their feelings, that to me is when you're entering a really dangerous territory of you are now putting people at risk. And we could probably go on about that, but there's several instances, unfortunately, in prison where a biological male has been put into a female prison, one of whom actually had been put in for previous sex offences. And unfortunately, when they were put in, they reoffended in the exact same nature. Now, someone like myself, I have no experience in criminal background, law background, or anything like that. But I could have told you before that happened that was a really bad idea. And unfortunately, it turned out to be the same. You know, I don't have children, but I do have an 80-something-year-old gran and a 50-year-old something mum. And I'm not going to sit here and say every time they go to the toilet in a public place, I'm scared for their safety. But and also because I'm not saying that every time they go to the toilet, there's going to be someone who will try to abuse a system to act in a predatory way. But I don't think we should be making the system easier for someone who will abuse the system to do what they want to do. I think that fundamentally safeguarding has got to be at the forefront of our minds. And I think this is, it's a dangerous place just now that if we don't put people's physical, physical persons in a forefront of what we're thinking of, it could just lead to, unfortunately, more and more people offending by using this loophole. And that scares me personally.
Thanks, Scott. Hector, over to you, mate.
Yeah, I agree with all the panel so far. And I think an important part is what Lisa mentioned about not many people know exactly what is happening at the moment. And it is concerning. I think there was a recent poll done that showed, was it 70% didn't follow what was happening. Mm-hmm. And I think when people do actually realise what's happening, there is going to be a backlash. The main thing that gets me is you had the Sarah Everard case when, you know, there was a slogan that struck me off, educate your boys. How are we supposed to educate our children to respect women if we're raising women? What do we tell them? It is really concerning. And on a local issue, I think there was plans for a new Inverness school to just have unisex toilets. I wrote an open letter to all my councillors, MSPs, MP and Nicola First Minister. I think Ian Lawson put it on his blog. But I was raising the fact that unisex toilets for teenage girls going through the changes in their life, the most worrying periods they'll be going through, unisex toilets is a very dangerous and worrying prospectus, I think. And if it's a new build school, I cannot understand why not have a male toilet, a female toilet, and a unisex toilet. It's a solution. Why force your opinions onto people?
Thanks, Hector. Eileen, I'm going to come to you. If you get your hand up, if you get a question you want to ask. If you unmute yourself, please, Eileen.
Okay, right. Just a number of things there, Peter. Lisa said, you know, when she went to university, she wasn't really aware that all this was bubbling around in the background. It's capitalism, right? As you know, we had been discussing something that we found about the hedge funders, right? And how they were expecting a rise of about 500,000 trans kids by the year 2026. And that was due to the friendly education policies from within the UK. And they were telling people that they could expect a 25% return on their investment. This is what's driving this. Now, this isn't about making life a bit easier for trans people. There've always been, you know, some trans people. I remember, you know, as a woman, you go into a ladies' toilet kind of thing, and you would see somebody, it was quite obviously a man, but dressing up. They would just come in, they'd do their business, they'd come out, they'd fluff their hair, put a bit of lip gloss on, and on they'd go. Now, there was nothing, maybe other women there would have raised their eyebrows a wee bit. Nobody was unkind, nobody said anything to them. And for them to be making out that they are the most marginalised group in the country or in the world just now is an utter lie and a disgrace. This is being led by capitalism, and the amounts of money that are being thrown about it are obscene. And another point I'd like to make was just today, one of the criminology publications was very surprised that they found that trans women who had been in jails down south were actually reverting to what they called their birth sex as soon as they had served their sentence. And in interviewing some of these trans women, one guy actually admitted that he had said he was trans in order to get into a women's prison to be able to have sex with other prisoners. Now you've got to think, did that actually come from the University of the Heart of Thinking? Because we pointed this out, you know, when they were doing this, we actually pointed this out, that this would be a consequence. Right? Why won't Scotland listen to us? Why won't they listen to us about safeguarding? Why are they determined to strip safeguarding from women and also silence us through the hate crime bill so that we cannot be the first defenders of children? Right? And that's something that makes my blood boil. Right? The safeguarding that's been taken away from women and from children. And as for these child friendly education policies that have been put in place in the UK that's going to drive this, right? It was something that Robin McAlpin said, you know, the other night, and it blew me away. And when he said, don't think for a minute that Scotland doesn't have its equivalent of the Chatham House rules or the think tanks or anything else. And they are the people behind us, behind that. And we as mothers, grandmothers, parents, women should be getting together with the men, because we've got more in common than we have apart. And we all should be turning around to Scottish Government and saying, no, no more, ain't having this. Right? And we need a change, and we need it right now, because we cannot wait for this. We can't. We need to do something about this right now.
Thanks, Eileen. Is there any of the rest of your audience want to come in on anything that's been said so far?
Hi, could I just actually make a quick comment? I'm retired now. I've been retired for a few years, but when I retired, I worked in care, but I worked in a different type of care from normal. I worked in what you call forensic services. That was dealing with adults with learning difficulties who had been through the criminal justice system. The majority of the clients we had were sex offenders. Now, when I retired, I could have named you 3 people that stay in Kirkcaldy that, had they been able to self-ID as a woman, would have done it in an absolute heartbeat, and I would have guaranteed that each one of them would have offended. So when I brought this up at a discussion, it was just before the 2019 general election, I was told, well, no, this won't happen because they'll get 24-hour supervision orders. At this point, a Labour councillor, I expect it's the SNP, but from a Labour councillor butted in and said that if the support workers tried to stop them going into a women's only space, they were actually going against their human rights. Now that is ridiculous. These three people that I'm thinking about in particular would at a heartbeat re-offend. Two of them have been, not just one or two convictions, I'm talking about dozens of convictions for child molestation. This is their Christmases, birthdays, everything all wrapped up into one. And the Scottish Government know this, they know it, but there's a small percentage, and what they've got in Nicola Sturgeon, I've got no idea. But as you said, this is Big Pharma that's pushing it because there's money involved. And where there's money involved, that's where corruption comes in. And we have to do something about it. We have a chap within our LACU who every day goes to a different primary school, and he gives out this little leaflet he's made up. Basically, it's explaining some of the teacher guidance. That's more to do with the sex survey and things like that. But people don't know about it. You know, they don't know about it. I was at a meeting last November in Falkland Town Hall. It was Women Won't Wish to put it on. Eva Comrie was one of the speakers there. 64 people in the audience, not a single one of them heard of it. So this is going to cause eruptions when it actually comes out more publicly. And I think that's why the SNP are going to hold back till after May. So it's up to us as ALBA members and ALBA candidates to get this message out there before May. You know, we need to get the message out to the public.
Thanks very much, Craig. I'll let Lisa on you go. You unpick that first of all, and I'll then just open up.
I was just going to reiterate as well. I wanted to bring in something Scott said. He said it's about safeguarding. Now, it absolutely is. I have got trans friends, and I don't think for a second they want to get in and harm people, but it is. It's about the loophole that's now been created. We're allowing sex offenders to ID as women, and they can now go into women's safe spaces. And I think Scott hit the nail on the head when he was talking about safeguarding. That's exactly what we need to do.
Thank you, Lisa. Hector,
that was.
Sorry, I was just going to go to Hector first because he's been sat for a wee while in between. So Hector, over to you, mate, and then we'll come back to you, Robert. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it is about safeguarding, and I think the big thing is, for me, certainly, it's the self-ID aspect of it. I think gender reform, if that can be done while protecting women's rights, then it should be done. But the self-ID, it's attacking women's rights. And I think we should be asking ourselves, why don't so many people know about it? You know, I'm sure we all went through the SNP bad stage where the media was against us. The SNP are supposed to be an independence party that is standing to break Scotland away. So with a policy like this, why aren't the British media all over it? I think that's an important question we need to be asking ourselves.
Robert?
Hi, yeah. I just wanted to kind of comment on kind of a more general theme that you tend to see on Twitter about targeting the ALBA party as being transphobic, or we talking about our members and our candidates hate trans people. I think you can kind of gauge from our conversation tonight, we've got nothing to do with trans people. Like Eileen said, trans people have been around for generations. What it is about protecting safe spaces for women. It's not about trans people being predators. It's about predators being predators. And allowing something like self-ID actually harms, I think, the wider kind of trans movement. Because I seen an article reporting the other day on Twitter about a trans woman forming a sex act in an alleyway, and they were spotted by a family, young kids, and the article itself was quite incredible. It was insulting to everyone's intelligence, using language like her penis, things like that. I mean, when it comes to this stage, I just can't believe we're in this position. But what was refreshing, really refreshing, was it gave the eyewitness accounts from the children. And the children said they seen a man in an alleyway doing this thing. And it was continually, every single witness seen that. So kind of the innocence of youth, I guess. If children can see it, I'm pretty sure everyone else can. But people, it's individuals like that that are actually harming trans people and creating a kind of hostile environment for them. Because these people aren't trans; they're sexual offenders who fetishize dressing like women. And I think we need to push that message as well. Certainly something to push back on anyone that calls this transphobic. It's not anything to do with hating trans people at all.
I completely agree with what Rob's said there. The Alba Party are not the anti-trans party, far from it. They're protecting women's rights. Our policy protects women's rights. I agree with Hector. If gender reform can be done in a way that safeguards women's rights, I'll support it. I will support it. But the problem is, and one of the things we're often accused of for having the stance we have, is that, you know, we're on the wrong side of the debate somehow, because it's not transgender people who abuse women, it's men who abuse women. Well, I agree with that. But by self-ID, we're opening up a problem where there's a loophole where men will be able to abuse women. That's wrong, and it should stop.
Thank you very much, Councillor Lee Wilson. Scott, over to you.
Yeah, no, I think just to kind of echo what everyone else has said, I think it's been a really kind of great discussion on that. I think certainly that's something I think that was really evident in the call last night, where, you know, it's not anti-trans, it's not anti-anybody. You know, I think one thing that's been incredibly refreshing when going on the candidate calls is there is such a vast kind of diverse pool of candidates able to get together. It's been really nice to see that. So no, I think certainly with Hector and Leah, I completely agree. I would totally get behind if it could be done safely in protecting women's rights.
Thanks very much, Scott. Eileen, do you want to come back in on some on that before we move on to chat about independence, my favourite thing that we'll be talking about this evening?
It was what was brought up about those children who were witnesses, right, in that case, who were quite able to say, no, that was a man, right, and he did this. So why are Scott Gov pushing an ideology in schools, right, where children are told not to believe the evidence of their own eyes, where 4-year-olds are being told that they can be a boy or they can be a girl, and that they can actually be socially transitioned at school without their parents knowing about it, by getting called by another name. Right? And Lisa is quite right. They're all quite right. Parents don't know about this. One, I think it's because the press are hostile towards it, and that's policy captured by all the lobbyists. People are frightened to open their mouths about it. And the other thing is, I disagree that they'll wait till after May. I think they'll do it now whilst parents don't know. That's my biggest fear, that they're going to try and push all this through before parents get to know the full picture about it. So
it's a good point, Eileen. I think we've discussed enough. Hector, you want to come in on that? On you go, buddy.
I was just going to come in and say, I think it's important to actually state that the Alba Party policy passed at conference on protecting women's rights, it's not against gender reform. I've just checked here. It's conference invites and will endorse a citizens' assembly on how best to reform the gender recognition process in a respectful, sensitive and positive fashion. So anyone that says, you know, we're anti-trans, we're anti-this, I think we state our policy doesn't reject it, it actually encourages gender reform, but done in a sensible way.
Yeah, there are too many loopholes that would allow for not the 1% of genuine trans people who this might affect, but possibly a higher percentage of offenders who with ulterior motives who might latch on to the loopholes in the legislation. And I think it's accurate that we point that out.
Yes.
I think we've discussed it and we've gone into depth with it enough with each candidate. As I say, I'd now like to move on and we'll discuss your thoughts on independence and Scotland's push for Scottish independence. Hector, I'll come to you first. You started with a football analogy when you were bringing in your introduction. So what's your thoughts on independence and the need for it? What can you see differently from late 2014 when the recovery after the no vote, when everybody started to re-gel, versus what you're seeing today and up to the lead up to today, where we're at in the independence side of things?
I think my reasons for wanting independence are exactly the same as 2014, but they've just been sort of times by 10. You know, we've got a much worse right-wing Tory government with a big majority. We've been taken out of Europe against our will. And I think what we were discussing earlier on about poverty, I mean, poverty in Scotland's getting worse, so we need independence. I think Kenny McCaskill wrote an article, I believe it was in 2020, and he was stating that independence is essential for the economy recovery after COVID. And I think these words just explain why Scotland needs independence. We can't, as someone mentioned, we can't afford to wait any longer. People are losing their lives because we're not independent. They're dying under bridges, they're dying homeless. We need to address this and win our independence. We need independence in 23 or by the latest by a plebiscite in 24.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. But open it up. We'll come to Robert.
Yeah, it's actually quite sorry. It's actually quite demoralising talking about this, that we're still talking about this now. I think when you look back to the Brexit referendum, I think every independent supporter jumped at their seat at the opportunity that had been given to us so soon after the last referendum, because this was a real turning point and it was a huge opportunity. And then throughout the years that progressed, like this, a number of landmark points, but Theresa May lost her majority. The SNP had that huge group in Westminster. There are countless opportunities throughout the years that we've missed opportunities. I don't know whether it's poor leadership, poor strategic planning. But to think that we could get to the end of this lifetime in the Scottish Parliament, 10 years after that Brexit referendum, and still not even have had the opportunity to vote on this is quite incredible. Again, I think I've said that this is why I'm a member of the Alba Party, because independence needs to be a priority. And sadly for so many now within the SNP, it doesn't quite seem to be that priority. When will it be? I hope I'm proven wrong. I don't like to be wrong often, but if I am wrong on anything, I hope it's this. I hope there is a referendum next year, but it's cutting it very close now. We've not even asked Boris Johnson for a referendum. And we know what he's going to say, but then the legal challenges that will then follow will take time. So I'm not too optimistic.
It's a sad one.
I think Rob entirely right that I think if you look at what's happened since 2014, almost everything that's happened has highlighted the need for independence. So the week after, or indeed the day after the independence vote, David Cameron announced English votes for English laws. 2015, the UK Conservative majority. 2016, the Brexit vote. 2017, another Conservative government. 2019, another Conservative majority. All of these things were done against the wishes of the people of Scotland, and they've highlighted the need for independence. But, you know, I saw a poll recently that had independence support roughly on about 50%. Now, I think that's pretty remarkable given everything, literally everything that's happened over the past few years. And the fact that we've not increased support for independence is purely down to the fact we've not been campaigning for it. The main party of government, the main party of independence have not been campaigning for it. There is an onus on them, a responsibility on them to campaign for independence, because as we've said, it simply can't wait. But I make this prediction, and this is why the council elections are so important, not just for the Alba Party, though they are, but for independence more generally. Because if the Alba Party elect a team of councillors across Scotland and I believe we will. And trust me, every day will be St Andrew's Day in the SNP.
Wow. Scott, we'll ask you.
Yeah, no, I think there's been so many good points touched on. I think certainly in terms of percentages, I've kind of been keeping an eye on where the kind of the no to yes has kind of been sitting, and I think it's quite remarkable actually. Over the last, give or take 3 years, we've seen yes not really go below 45%, other than a very few occasions. However, we have seen heights is up to 58% for it. Now, what I think is really important is that's during times of a political lull, I would call it. We've not really had anything to get excited about, especially if you're for independence, because the SNP aren't doing much. I think it's quite remarkable that we can get as high as 58% with no date. Now, for example, we've got a general election coming up, 2024, I think it will be. If I go to anyone right now, are you excited about that? Probably not. No. You maybe, yeah, no. But if you go, there's an election tomorrow, how are you feeling? So you're looking at potential numbers as 58% people for independence with no date in sight. Wait till you set a date and watch those numbers increase by 58 to 60 possibly. I hope 70. I think Alex Salmond in one of his updates had a really good point, is why on earth are we not pushing for it more? That Boris is in charge. I've seen someone comment saying he's a walking sign for independence, and you're thinking absolutely. It is such a right-wing government just now where you can completely see the difference of opinion between Scotland and predominantly England, but the rest of the UK, where the fact that more hasn't been done genuinely baffles me. So, no, I think there's definitely exciting times to come, but worrying that there's not been more done, because you're thinking, we've probably had 6 votes or 6 elections, not counting 2015, because at the time Nicola did actually say, don't class 2015 as a mandate. That was very much clear throughout that whole campaign. But since then, we've had between council elections, Brexit itself, European elections, the SNP have won with pretty much overwhelming majority in every single time. Yet we're in 2022 now, and there's still no dates, which baffles me.
Hi, Lisa, final over to you.
I was just going to say, if the people didn't want independence, they wouldn't be voting for SNP, because, like you say, SNP are the party, or allegedly the party of independence. I think a lot of people are put off by independence just now. I know I've spoken to people who were pro-independence and they voted yes back in 2015, but a lot of people are saying they wouldn't vote just now because of who the leader is. We need to get that out of their head. We need to get, vote for Alba, because Alba is for independence. We are truly the independence party. And I think as an independent country, there's so much we could give without having to ask permission to use our own money from Westminster.
Thanks very much. I'm going to ask you a question now that's we've got somebody else going to be coming in a wee second to ask you a question. Will you be mentioning independence on the doorstep? So, yeah. Lisa, we'll go Lisa first of all, since you finished, but thanks, Lee. We know your answer. Lisa?
Yeah, I will be mentioning independence on the doorstep. I'll also be mentioning various other things. I've got a few things that I want to speak about. Obviously, women's rights and poverty being one. There's a few things that I think that are really important in the community. In my community, there's quite a lot of non-verbal children, so I will be campaigning to get Makaton in schools as one of the key languages in the early stages of schools. So I'll be speaking on about that and various other things that I can't remember off the top of my head just now. But independence will definitely be on my agenda.
Lee, just straight to you then.
I've said it. Yes, quite simply. The Alba Party are the party of independence, as Lisa says. We shouldn't shy away from campaigning for it. We shouldn't shy away from talking about it. It's our raison d'etre. We are the party of independence. So yes.
Thanks, Lee. Hector?
Yeah, 2 reasons. First reason, I think any independence supporter that is standing for any election should mention independence at any election possible. And secondly, I can imagine the response I'm going to get is, but it's local elections. What has independence got to do with that? If there's to be a referendum in 23 or a plebiscite in 24, it's going to be the councillors you elect at this election that'll be in place taking part in the negotiations, not at Westminster, but making sure that the powers that come from Westminster to Holyrood are passed on to local government.
Brilliant. Robert?
Yes, absolutely. And if you were scared to talk about independence, I don't think you should be standing for the Alba Party. I think it has to be brought to people's attention. You have to connect the recent scandals in Westminster and all the things that Lee talked about over the last 6 years, and bring it to people's attention. Say, look, do you want this? Are you happy with this kind of situation? And if you're not, then independence has to be your priority. But I think we also need to talk to those, and it's an increasing number growing day by day, those that are so frustrated that we continually appear to be being led on about an independence referendum. And we need to say to them, look, elect an Alba councillor in your local area to send a direct message to the SNP. Look, if you aren't going to enact a referendum, then step aside, because the Alba Party will be there to take your place.
Scott, brilliant. Robert, Scott, on you go.
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. You know, I think that, you know, Alba, as everyone said, are the Party for Independence. It's our #1 priority, and I think with local elections obviously being quite different, you know, we've said from creation that we want to work with other pro-yes parties. So I think it'd be a bit silly not to. So no, there's obviously local issues as well, but fundamentally, yeah.
Thank you so much, Scott. Lita, yeah, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, this is a question about local democracy. You're all going to be councillors. You're going to represent your local ward and local people. I used to be part of a community council and represented my very local people in the community council. And we were told that we were only going to meet with our councillors in the ward twice a year. What might you, as a councillor, think that you could do in a practical way to increase local democracy and to bring budgets to local communities for very essential things like a minibus to take people to their hospital appointments, for playgrounds for children, for all sorts of amenities, all the way down to basic amenities such as being able to have a walk-in accident and emergency system in close to you. So what might you do as a councillor to improve local democracy for the people who are going to vote for you?
Thank you, Lita. Good question. Lee, we'll come to you first.
It's a very good question, Lita. First of all, you had very odd councillors not wanting to attend your community councils or only attending twice. What a privilege to have them biannually. But no, it's a very good question. And one of the things I'm very keen on is something that they are progressing very much in Southern America in terms of participatory budgeting. We've done some of that in Scotland, but I think we can go further. So what that means, in essence, is taking decisions out of the hands of, well, elected members like me and giving it to local communities in a democratic way so they can decide how money is spent in their local community. So they can spend it on a local park or a minibus to take people to the hospital. But crucially, it's the people who live in the communities who decide, and not elected members, or even worse, officers who've not been elected by anyone.
Thanks, Lee. Hector, we'll come to you next.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. On the only meeting twice a year, I think if there's any positives to come out of that, it's been the uptake and use of Zoom meetings. So I think councillors should be using that a lot more to speak with, especially up in the Highlands. I mean, what the Highlands is the size of Belgium, I think. So rural areas is very hard to get round ward members. We should also be having in-person meetings. I think that is very important to be having. On the bringing money back to local, I think it's the same as my answer to the housing thing. We need to decentralise it. We need to get it into not just local authorities, but local community councils. In the Highlands, Lita, you'll know yourself, there's a lot of talk now about the re-regionalisation of the council formation. And I think that needs to be discussed a lot more, and we need a lot more powers, a lot more budgets back to community councils. I think everything is about, for me, bringing it back to as much a local level as we can.
Thanks, Hector. Scott, we'll come to you next, mate.
Yeah, I think certainly in terms of the only meeting twice a week or twice a year, sorry, twice a week. First and foremost, I think, especially through new media outlets, Zoom, Teams, whatever, make yourself available for there. You could even potentially do drop-in sessions where you maybe even do like a live stream and people can come in and ask questions. I know that a few members of Parliament have tried various things like that. I remember one particularly. It didn't go too well, but I think that was due to the party with. But looking for more participation, certainly. In terms of kind of being able to fund for stuff, obviously my understanding is the three main ways you get funding is through council tax, the Scottish Parliament itself, and then actually kind of community hubs, five-a-side pitches and things like that. So I guess you could possibly just look at the community as a whole and try to redistribute funds for essential needs. And if it was felt that, say, for example, in one of the wards that a minibus to the hospital might be quite useful, fight for that, and work with your colleagues to get the things that the local community would need the most. Thanks very much, Scott. Robert, we'll come to you next, mate.
Hi. Well, I can't quite understand why you'd be a councillor and you'd only want to meet twice a year. I think one of the drives being a councillor is because you want to help your local community that you live in. You want to make it better. You want to speak to people and meet with people. It's certainly not the money people do this job for. It's definitely the service to the community, I think, and making people's lives better. But the Alba Party are a grassroots political party. We like to be out there speaking to people, very visible, speaking to the voters who might feel disenfranchised. That's certainly one thing that I'm pushing in my constituency or my ward, is that voter turnout has been incredibly low in this ward. In 2012, it was 26%. In 2017, it was just over 30. So it appears to be getting better. But I think you can see this across Scotland in poorer areas where people tend to think their vote doesn't matter. I think part of that is because politicians, councillors aren't accessible to them. And so in order to get that, people feel like their voice matters, you need to be accessible. So I think that's fundamental to any councillor's role. And that's certainly something I'll be willing to do. But in terms of giving your local people kind of say in what the money is spent on, I think fundamentally you need to just ask them what their priorities are. Because if you don't go out and speak to people, then you don't actually understand what they want, what their desires are. So that's certainly been, I can only talk for Aberdeen, but all the candidates we're standing in Aberdeen, that's been a priority for them, getting out on the doorstep, speaking to people, finding out their concerns and what priorities they want. And hopefully, if we get elected, we can enact on that.
Thanks very much, Robert. And Lisa, over to you. You're on mute there, Lisa, just so that you know.
Oh, sorry, it was the boys were making noise. I agree with Robert. I think the only way to find out what your local constituents want is to get out and speak to them. I am a very talkative person. I actually was at a street stall this morning before jumping in the car and down in Manchester. I chat to everyone. I want to know what the local concerns are. I've spoken to quite a few of my potential constituents, and they are deterred from voting. They said, voting is an illusion of democracy, was their exact words. They said, we vote and nothing happens. So people are put off by voting. So I'm trying to get into the wards and explain to the people in my wards why voting is so important, promising them that, if there's something you need done, I will fight tooth and nail to get this done for you. And two times a year to see somebody, come on, I'm not even elected. And I had potential constituents sending me messages over social media asking if I could meet with them on issues. I went to their house, I met with them, I went to the site that they wanted me to see. There wasn't a great lot I could do for them in the position that I'm in, but I went down. I think as a councillor, you must be face to face, you must be contactable.
Try and help out there. Leah, just to see if you wanted to come back in on what was said there by the candidates.
No, I think it's interesting. We're all singing from the same hymn sheet, and we're all rooted in our communities. Any councillor should be absolutely rooted in the community they represent. But as an aside, one interesting thing here, and I think you'll have got an impression of all the candidates, is just what an abundance of talent we have in this party, fielding candidates across Scotland, and particularly young talent as well. It's so heartening to see.
As Lita, did you want to come back in and say something there as well?
It wasn't on this topic, so I can wait because it's a separate question.
Well, on you go. If it's a separate question, we'll just answer it as it comes.
If you feel okay that it's time to move on. Yeah. Here, have a suggestion really, which is we've heard that poverty, if you like, is a bit, I mean, you've spoken quite a lot about poverty, but who gets to define it? Who gets to say how we tackle it? Who gets to say how we erase poverty and who erases it? We know that Scotland relies an awful lot on charities, which are run by private companies, which often are not for profit. And we know that an awful lot of services are piecemeal and postcode lottery, if you like, and that more and more services are going to be excluding rather than including the million people that we know that are in poverty. So as an Alba candidate, as a local councillor, would you become involved with your local people to develop an assembly, a citizens' assembly, on looking at what causes poverty and how citizens think that it should be defined and how citizens think that we as a country should respond to it at a local level and at a national level? Would you get involved as a candidate in a citizens' assembly with your local people?
So we'll open it up. We'll come to Scott first on this occasion.
Yeah, no, thanks. There's a few things there. So I guess would I come together as a local assembly? Yeah, you know, fundamentally, if there's anything that we can do as a whole to tackle poverty, I think we need to. You know, to kind of take point by point, if that's okay. Who defines poverty? Well, it's a tricky one, isn't it? Because I think people will have different levels of poverty. You know, I could be left on £50 a week and I might go, oh my goodness, I am completely done for money. But that £50 to me might be significantly more to someone else because they can maybe budget better or because they maybe had to go through that before. So I think it really comes down to individually, you know, what you can live off, and, you know, if you're living within your means or if you're living out with your means, and then maybe more to do to support with that. I know people, especially when I was younger, went to uni, went to colleges, got funding through that. But then when it came to the end of their SAS, they went, oh, I have quite a lot of outgoing bills, but not a lot of money coming in. So although they were, you know, very highly educated at that stage, they were actually living in poverty. So I think poverty can affect people in different ways. But for us, I think whose job is it to eradicate it? Everyone, you know. I think as a Alba candidate, you know, it's obviously something or very close to my heart that I would want to work with to eradicate. But I think, you know, it's something where it does kind of dishearten me that now where you walk into, I believe, any main supermarket, there is a food bank usually there. It saddens me that we're at the stage where it's so common now. More needs to be done from everyone to eradicate it. Obviously, I think with Alba, with our 5-point plan, there's certainly plans in place, which is great. But I think fundamentally it does come down to every one of us to tackle this as best as we can.
Thank you very much, Scott. Robert, we'll come over to you next, mate.
Yeah, I'd absolutely participate in a citizens' assembly to discuss and kind of define poverty, because even though we might be elected councillors, we're not the arbiters of truth. I think discussion is always going to be something that everyone can learn from and try and get kind of all sides of the debate. I think talking about poverty, it's very relative. Poverty in this country is very different to poverty in other countries. Even very affluent countries like Norway and Denmark experience some levels of poverty. So I think in terms of erasing it, it's going to be something that's incredibly difficult to do, but doesn't mean we shouldn't try. And certainly we're nowhere near close to doing that right now in Scotland. So I think something Scott said actually was really interesting, that people might not realise they're in poverty. And if you're sitting there worried about whether or not you're going to be able to pay rent or energy bills or food shopping, then you probably are in poverty. That's not something that people who don't experience poverty ever have to worry about when whether or not they can go shopping for a week or not. So I think probably a better education around it, and probably being more encouraging people to be more open about the situation they find themselves in, because when people speak about themselves being in poverty, that can often reassure other people that they're not alone in this fight. So I think certainly citizen assembly could be a good way to go down and discuss and open up the conversation to try and find a proper solution, because it's certainly not working.
Thanks, Robert. Lisa, I'll come to you.
Thank you, Robert. I actually like your point. I think you've got a really good point there. I think you're trying to say that we should be destigmatising poverty. I think more and more people are in poverty, and like Scott and Robert have both said, they don't realise that they're in poverty. As for who defines poverty, I think there are many definitions. I think it's on a case-by-case basis. So one person's poverty is somebody else's, like somebody else would not be in poverty. There are severe levels of poverty where you've got people actually sitting in the dark or sitting in the cold, mums that are going without food to feed their children because that's the only option they've got available to them. Or you've got people that are a couple of £100 short maybe at the end of the month and they can't pay their rent, and they're like, well, you know, if we don't get this, we could afford that. So there are many definitions of poverty. As for a citizens' assembly, yeah, absolutely. I would love to sit down and speak to people and get their thoughts and find out exactly what everyone else is saying, because without the people in your constituency, you're nobody, and you need them as much as they need you, and you're working for them, you're not working for you.
Absolutely, Lisa. Lee, come to you next.
Yes, in answer to the question, not only is there poverty, economic poverty in Scotland, there's also a poverty of ideas in terms of how to deal with it, and a vision, as I touched on earlier, bold enough from the mainstream parties to tackle it. So I think we need to be radical in how we tackle poverty. The question about how we define poverty is a very interesting one. And I want to touch on the composition largely of both parliaments, Scottish and Westminster. We have made some real progress in terms of increasing diversity, in terms of having more female parliamentarians. That's a good thing. In terms of having more people from ethnic backgrounds, that's a good thing. That's progress we've made. I'll tell you where we've not made progress though, and that's in getting people from working class backgrounds into Parliament who can articulate the cause and articulate the underlying causes of poverty in a way that other people can't. What concerns me is that increasingly, if you look at the Scottish Parliament and the composition of it, you have people who've gone to university, who've gone on to work for an MSP or an MP, and then gone on to become a parliamentary candidate. That's not necessarily representing the communities that they're serving. So I want to see more working class people standing for Parliament and getting involved in politics, because they're the ones with the real ideas about how we tackle poverty.
Thank you very much, Lee. And Hector, over to you.
I think everything I noted down has been said already, but the one thing I'd add is I think when we're talking about poverty, one of the terms I think is absolutely disgraceful and shameful in the UK is that we have a term, the working poor. So you can work a 40-hour week, a normal week, and still be in poverty. I think that's an absolute disgrace. On eradicating it, I think there's certain powers the Scottish government has and can be doing a lot more on, but to fully eradicate it, I still stand by my stance that we need full independence and we need full control.
Yeah, thanks very much, Hector. Again, it's good that each of you are echoing the other on for the most part, and then the individual things that you see yourself. That's what, for me, that's what it's all about. Eileen, I'll come to you. You'll need to unmute. Was there something you want to ask? And then Carol, will come to you after Eileen, okay?
Right, two things. Who defines poverty? And I'm just thinking, why don't we ask the poor? I'm thinking in terms of adults, right, who are on £73 a week job seekers allowance. Okay, the rent might be getting paid, but I don't know how in God's name they are going to manage to pay their portion of council tax that they've got to pay from that £73, how they're going to pay for fuel, how they're going to keep an internet connection going on a phone to keep in touch with their job coach and stop themselves getting sanctioned, and how they're going to eat. So I think it's very important that we ask these adults who, and I think there's actually quite a lot of them, right? I think at the last census it said there were 500,000 or just over 500,000 families in Scotland, right, you know, with children under the age of 16. But right now, the proportion of adults who are living by themselves for whatever reason, there's an awful lot of them. It could be, you know, like just under 50% in some areas. So number one, I think we should be asking the poor. And another thing I think we should be doing, and it's to address poverty and address a lot of things, and it's in education. We haven't been training enough apprentices in the trades for a long, long time. Now, down where I stay, they've just opened the Maybole bypass. And for the first time, you know, when it was open, I turned my head and I saw these rows and rows and rows of porta cabins that were there. They were hidden, you know, when we still had to go through Maybole. And I was raging to find out that what they did was housed workers that came from England to work on that Maybole bypass. Was there no men in Scotland that could have done this job? Were there no men who were unemployed, you know, at this time that could have got jobs labouring, you know, on it? Because there was a lot of digging and things like that. Went on for about a year, you know, building this. Was there nobody in Scotland could have had those jobs? In fact, what they did was they imported people up from England and put them up in porta cabins.
Probably
disgraceful.
Probably a much higher individual cost per
Yes.
worker there. So that comes down to maybe services. Carol, can I ask what your point is? And we'll do a sweep of the panel for both of the points that get raised. Eileen, can you put yourself back on mute just so that we can...
Yeah, slightly different topic, but still related to poverty in terms of transport, getting to hospital appointments, supermarkets, being able to buy clothes. There's no clothes shops in Skye and Razzie, for example. So I just wondered what the panel's view is on recent reports that the Scottish Government's considering reintroducing road and bridge tolls. I personally campaigned to abolish the Skye Bridge toll along with 300 Skye residents, and we've got 3 criminal charges in the process. And really, this feels like a total stab in the back from the Scottish Government.
Thank you very much, Carol. I think it's apt that we start with Hector here on this one.
Yes, just on that, I agree with Carol. It's a total stab in the back to all those in Skye that campaigned against the bridge tolls. On a Scotland-wide aspect, I think they've got to look at, so the reasons for this, which I've been reading, are that it's to tackle a climate emergency, take more cars off the road. I'm totally for tackling the climate emergency, but I think they need to look at how many cars is this going to take off the road realistically, against how many people is this going to affect as an added expense. With poverty rates going through the roof, as we've just been discussing, I can only see this as a added expense that many aren't going to be able to avoid. And yeah, I think when I was reading an article that mentioned the first time this was brought up by the Labour government 20 years ago, the Alba leader, Alex Salmond, labelled it as, I know what it is, a poll tax on wheels. And I totally agree with that.
Don't see it any differently. Scott?
Yeah, I think it's certainly for myself. It's not. I don't often use bridges or anything. I'm not being a non-driver, so it's not something that I have to myself impact with. But again, it's little things like this where, you know, you think with the increase in gas and electricity, introducing bridge tolls for those who will be using it, it's just putting more things in place to essentially have people with less money at the end of the month, which is incredibly disappointing. I think if we're at the stage where we're kind of saying, you know, we need to be doing things like this to fund other things, for me, it's quite a worrying stage to be in. But I can't remember if it was Denmark or possibly Norway, where they do a thing where if they're making new motorways, if they're building bridges or whatever, I think I've seen a report where they will increase tax in certain areas to pay it off until it's all done, if for, you know, medical or whatever things they'd paid off as well. So possibly even looking at maybe something like that, where if we're saying that we physically cannot use any other more money and we have to start budgeting people for bridges and toll tax, etc., is there potentially something we look at where we maybe take more of a kind of Scandinavian approach to it? But just a thought.
Thanks, Scott. Robert, we'll come to you next, Nick.
It's certainly a bizarre move by the SNP. Just quickly on Hector's point about how it's a drive to reduce people's carbon footprint, which is a noble cause. I think everyone understands that climate change is an important issue, but for communities like Skye, that bridge is a lifeline for so many people. And to then put the burden, like others have said, onto people whose budgets are getting smaller and smaller, I think it's phenomenal. But I think this is clearly the Green Party influence on the SNP. I think Alex Salmon put it fantastically well that the Green Party are obsessed with student politics, and it seems to whatever ideas they come up with, it just doesn't seem to have any kind of real world kind of acknowledgement. Like I think probably what Lee was talking about, a lot of these people are probably grown up middle class, but fairly wealthy, and don't have proper firm understanding about poverty and smaller budgets. I think another example of this is in Glasgow City Council. The Greens and the SNP put forward a proposal to lobby the UK government to increase fuel duty in an attempt for people to get off the roads and start using public transport. Now, at a time when people's budgets are getting smaller and smaller, to make costs more is just a ridiculous thing. Surely the obvious answer is to make public transport more appealing, make it cheaper, make it run better, provide more services. I just can't quite believe we're in a situation where we are today with the SNP. And I think they need to waken up soon, because people, because it might seem fairly a minor point about bridge tolls and stuff, but these are things that affect people on a daily basis, and that's what angers people, and that's where governments begin to fall.
Thank you, Robert. Lisa, we'll come to you next, please.
I've actually got a friend who's a single mother, and she lives in Dundee, and she struggles enough to make ends meet. She works in St Andrews, so she's got to cross the Tay Bridge every single day to get to work twice there and back. And something like that, a toll crossing on the bridge, that would really, like, you know, she would potentially be at a point where she would have to pick between food or heating and crossing the bridge to get to work. And like Robert said, you know, if you wanted her to use public transport, we don't have enough public transport for her to use. There's not enough routes for it. The price as well, if you're putting money on the toll to cross the bridge, then you're going to put the bus fares up as well, because I assume it'll all reflect on it. So you're then putting people in, like, they're not having an easy time. But yeah, I wouldn't agree with the crossing toll charges.
Thank you, Lisa. And Councillor Lee Wilson is somebody that's been in council, maybe slightly a different perspective for you, having seen some of the things from the inside. Is there anything that you can add with the info that you have available to you that maybe some of the candidates running for the first time wouldn't be aware of?
Nothing that's not already been said. A poll tax on wheels is a very good way of putting it. In fact, another one for your leaflet, Hector. We've fully written it tonight, so it's been productive for you. But no, as Rob has mentioned, you can't tax people out of cars, not until you invest heavily in public transport. You can't tax people off the road. You've got to invest in alternatives for them to use. So that's a point to make. The repealing of the introduction of the polls again just seems like the SNP are trying to repeal everything popular that they did prior to 2014, which is a fundamentally silly place to be.
Lita, have you got a question you would like to ask? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute. Sorry.
Sorry. Yes, I got a final question. My final question is this. Here you are, you're a local councillor, you've been elected. Well done. Your local area, though, is suffering from a lack of housing, a lack of affordable housing in particular. There are big builders, big building companies, and they want to build lots of private to let for people with lots of money, but they don't want to build the houses that are affordable for the workers, for young couples to stay and to build a family. What, as a councillor, might you do in a practical way to deal with that or to respond to that?
So, Robert, we'll come to you first on this.
It's a tricky one, because I think, although affordable housing is very important, and this should be absolutely the priority of the Scottish Government. I think council houses, the scale of council houses being built over the last decade has been pretty terrible, to be honest. But these new homes that we've got getting built just generate some kind of income for the local economy, whether it be local businessmen, tradespeople that are able to get involved and help produce these new buildings. So there's positives and negatives to things like that. I think it's right to strike a balance. Okay, we can have these type of homes, but also as long as that's counteracted with the building of affordable housing, I think that's good for the economy and for people across certainly my city anyway.
Thank you, Robert. Lisa, over to you.
I'm very much like Robert. I'm not really sure what we could do in that situation. I assume when I get into the job, if I get into the job, I will know better.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Scott?
I'm not 100% sure on the actual percentage, but I think is it right in saying there's somewhere between 15 potentially to 30% of any new build of houses that comes into Scotland has to then go towards council housing and things like that. Is that right? Yeah. So I guess we could try to push for more to kind of say, look, how about we give you the grant rather than your competitor, but we push it to 40 instead. If the area is there and we can use the land, instead of using a big developer, possibly try to work with Link Housing instead. So I know Link have just came into my ward, and to be honest, it's created, I think, about 30 or so new affordable homes, which is great to see in a really nice area. So possibly if we could increase the percentages of the new builds, then be for council, or possibly work with Link Housing.
Thanks very much, Scott. Lee?
It's a very good question, and the figure I think you were looking for, Scott, was 25%, but it's not actually for council housing, it's for that famous word, affordable housing. But we spoke about the definition of poverty earlier on. Well, the definition of affordable housing is really opaque, and indeed it's a misnomer. What we deem affordable housing, what we term as affordable housing, so often isn't affordable. It's completely unaffordable to the vast majority of the population. Unfortunately, in terms of the powers we have as local councillors, that's limited because the National Planning Act is set in the Scottish Parliament. So I would like to see the percentage of affordable housing increase, but I think we need to debate, a proper debate about what is truly affordable housing. In my time at the council, it's been quite unfortunate actually that I've heard councillors push back over affordable housing, push back over the 25% figure, because it encourages the wrong sort of people into developments in middle class areas. That's shocking. So it's difficult in response to you, Lita, in terms of the powers that we have. What we can do as councillors is try and avoid NIMBYism and just vote against planning applications because it's in your own backyard and you think you might lose a few votes or become unpopular for it. We need housing, young people need housing, they need places to live and need affordable places to live.
Thanks very much, Lee. Hector, we've not came to you on this yet. On you go, mate.
So I'm actually writing a motion for the Alba conference on housing, and I think part of it might answer this question. I think there needs to be a public register for any new houses, any new planning permission, and then councils need the power to deal with that case by case, because I don't think a blanket approach can fix any of the issues. I mean, the Scottish Government have brought in this B&B licensing scheme. They say it's not to do with the housing, but I've got my queries on that. But I don't think that's going to solve the issue. I think all you're going to see there is small local run B&Bs, self-catering properties are going to end up in the market. Big companies are going to come in, buy them. You've got a chain of B&Bs. Whereas if we have had this public register and councils had the powers, that could be rejected. So I'm not sure if that quite answers the question, but yeah.
Robert, I'm going to come back to you, mate.
I think to enact any real change, certainly needs to come from central government. Like Lee said, councils are kind of hamstrung. I think often you just need to voice the concerns of local people whether or not you need to gauge whether or not they actually welcome this change. But I think placing more, I think we should, certainly a problem within Aberdeen, if you look on the Scottish Index of Multiple Deprivation, you see a very clear divide between the wealthy areas and poor areas. And I think that's fully emblematic across Scotland. And I think it's probably better instead of exacerbating that divide, if we are going to have housing projects, we need to make them sure they're integrated with the community and the community accept what's happening. Otherwise, you do get these terrible kind of north-south, east-west divides within cities, and that kind of exacerbates any kind of poverty issues.
Aye, totally. Scott, do you want to come back in on that there, mate? You've got your hand raised. Then Eileen will come to you after for the question, okay?
Yeah, I think in terms of lack of affordable housing in general, actually, it's interesting because it just came to me that I've actually got a few friends in kind of the more rural communities and kind of Ullapool, a few in Barra and places in Oban. And it was interesting that one of my friends had actually mentioned that when she had met with her now current partner, that they really struggled to get a property in Ullapool, a place where she was born and bred, had spent her entire life growing up. Because what had actually happened was you quite often now find is landlords from not this country will buy property and use it either as an Airbnb to rent it out, or will use it as a summer home, which actually, but due to that combined with a lack of available housing at the best of times, is actually creating an issue for up there. So I don't know if more can be done to possibly kind of, well, first and foremost, build more homes would be great, but to even maybe try to prevent, mass home ownership from landlords where they've maybe got 15, 20 properties, but in reality, you only really need one.
Thanks very much, Scott. Eileen, you got a question there?
I've got the answer to it.
Right, okay, brilliant, helpful.
As a geography and planning graduate, there's such a thing called a planning gain. So if you've got a big developer that wants to come in and build loads of, like really expensive houses, for a particular market, as councillors, you've actually got powers. I know there's national recommendations and, guidance of don't build on green belt and don't do this and don't do that. But you have a planning department attached to your council, right? And you can give permission. And what I would be doing, if I was a councillor, what I would be saying is, okay, then we'll give you a piece of land, or you can have this piece of land and you can develop it, but you're going to do 50-50. You're going to do 50% of the houses that you build will be, for you to sell at those expensive prices and everything else like that. But the other 50% you're going to build, and they're going to belong to the local authority, and they are going to be for people that are in need of housing. And that is the answer to it.
Thanks very much, Eileen. Well, it's something for the candidates to consider. A question coming in for Craig. Craig, do you want to ask a question here or want to make a comment?
Sorry, I thought my hand was up. I've got a quick question just before it though. I've got to say that the candidates tonight, amazing. They're an absolute credit to the Alba Party, and I really do wish every single one of them every success. You guys are outstanding. I'm an old guy, and it really cheers me up to see younger people taking an interest, and fantastic. I really do. I really do want you to win. I'm also standing as a candidate in Kirkcaldy, and I'm heavily involved, as you'll probably see behind me, with the S2 Kirkcaldy Hub. And we get a lot of people in there asking questions, not always with independence, things like that. We do get a lot of welfare questions. But I was in there on Wednesday, and I was talking to a guy. I didn't say I was a candidate or anything like that, but I showed him an Alba leaflet with the 5-point plan on it. And this is something that's been mentioned already tonight, and the 5-point plan is brilliant. It won't eradicate poverty, but it will help towards it. He came out and he asked me, that's great, I really like that. But if you're only going to raise the council tax, how are you going to pay for it? So my question is, I'll tell you after everybody else has answered what I said, but my question is, if somebody asks you that question, how would you answer it?
Right, so fairly, I think we'll come to Lee first of all on that one. Give everybody a chance to digest it.
It's a very good question, Craig, and it is something I've seen being asked elsewhere. As I touched on earlier on in the programme, the 5-point plan fully enacted would account for a little over 2% of the Scottish budget. So then, in my opinion, it becomes a question of priorities. And where do your priorities lie? well, I know where my priorities lie. If the response to that is, well, we need to set a balanced budget, as of course they do, where would the money then come from? Well, I think the argument then relates back to independence. If your fundamental argument is that we don't have the full strings, we don't have the full autonomy to raise all our own revenues, then we need independence, and we need it now, not tomorrow, not next year, not next decade, but now.
Thank you, Lee. Scott, I'll come to you next, mate.
It's a tough act to follow. I don't know if there's anything I could say differently from Lee, to be honest. No, I think just really echoing Lee's words. I think if we can look at child poverty and not, well, poverty as a whole actually, but child poverty certainly, and not think that 2% warrants us to action on it. That says, to me, that says more about our government than anything else. Poverty is never acceptable, and 2% seems like a small price to pay for putting steps in place to eradicate it.
Thank you, Scott. Hector, I'll come to you next, mate.
Yeah, I don't think there's much to add. I mean, it's not something as councillors that we're going to be able to enact, but we can certainly lobby the government to enact it. And as Lee said, if it's only 2% of the budget, it's all about how that budget is dealt with.
Thanks very much, Hector. Lisa?
It's not really a lot I can add either. If we've got 2%, I don't see why there's any need for more to take money from elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But it's about sort of priorities as well. I think there's so many things there that money is getting put into that it's unnecessary, that we could probably take a small percent from that if it was needed.
Yep. Robert?
I think I'd address why the council tax freeze is actually really important. I would say, I'd highlight that council tax itself is a regressive tax. It doesn't target on income, it targets on areas where we live, and disproportionately affects the poorer people in society. Now, the Scottish Government have control over a progressive form of taxation, income tax. So first and foremost, we have to lobby the Scottish Government and show them that actually the budgets in councils have been getting smaller and smaller, and it has to stop. There has to be a point where we say, okay, well, instead of putting this pressure onto the councils to increase a regressive form of taxation, use the progressive forms of taxation that we have at our disposal whilst we're still in the union, to really make change on that problem. But I think priorities, there's still a role, even if the Scottish Government don't oblige, there's still a role councils can do, and we have to outline our priorities and things that are important to us, and it certainly wouldn't be rolling out daft sex surveys in schools and cutting off the bottom of doors and etc. Some of the crazy things that the Scottish Government have been coming out with in recent weeks.
I promised I wasn't going to mention the lot off the bottom of the doors. I'm so glad that somebody did. Craig, over to you. And by the way, can I just say thanks very much for announcing that you're going to be standing as a candidate. That was a surprise to me. Had I known that, I got you in here on the panel a wee bit earlier and got your thoughts on everything that was gone through.
I'd been the old man of the group there, without a doubt.
But,
listen,
what was your answer to it, if you don't mind, then, Craig? Please.
Well, I kind of down the lines of what Lee was saying. I put it more on the lines of, can we afford not to do it? Fife Council have got reserves, and that's their rainy day money. Well, what's happening now is people are getting pissed on with debt, and we need to do something. I made a big thing about the under-18s. It's medically proven that an active body leads to an active mind, which means you've got less obesity, diabetes, mental health issues. These are the formative years of kids. What they learn in the formative years will carry on in adulthood. So it's a case of we need to get kids away from computer screens, away from Game Boys and all the rest of it. Game Boys, God, that probably shows my age. Yeah? The other thing that I actually brought up that day, and I've been looking into this, and it's something that I've really found interesting. I got some freedom of information requests back for Fife Council the other day. In the last 4 years, Fife Council have paid almost £80 million in PFI deals. They're projected to pay in the term of the next 5 years as councillors they're projected to pay £103 million in PFI deals. Now, a PFI deal is just a contract. That's what it is. It's a contract. These contracts now should be nationwide renegotiated. Councils can borrow money at the base rate, the Bank of England base rate. Councils can borrow money. They should be borrowing money, buying these contracts out. Okay, it's extending the life of the repayment, but the repayments could be as much as 90% less than what they're paying at the moment. That money then pays for our 5-point plan. So, you know, I'm doing some more work on the PFI thing, by the way, because I have heard of Cumbria County Council. They paid off a PFI deal in the financial year 2017-2018 and reduced their bill for £32,000 a year to 32 million a year, reduced it to 4.9 million a year. So there was a saving of 26.1 million. So it's something to be worth looking at and look into in your own area.
Well, we'll leave it on that for this evening. Thanks very much, Craig, and I'll maybe even try and exhaust something different with you if you DM after this. All right.
Aye, no problem.
I'll unpin you and we'll go back to the original panel. Right, just to give a final, I suppose, please vote for me come the 5th of May and your reasons why. And we'll start with Lisa, first of all.
If you vote for me on the 5th of May, I promise not to lie to you. I promise if I don't have the answer to something, I will be honest and I will tell you I don't have the answer. I'm not a miracle worker, but I will put my heart and soul into everything that I do. I fight for myself and I fight for my own children. I will fight for you and your children.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Scott?
Yeah, no, I think certainly for myself, you know, you'd get a very driven councillor who always wants to put the best outcome for you know the constituents first. A councillor very driven towards independence as well, and someone who's incredibly hardworking.
Thanks very much, Scott. Robert, we'll come to you next, mate.
Hi, yeah. So if you live in Tillydrone, Seaton and Old Aberdeen, then you have an opportunity to vote for me on 5th of May. I think it's time for a change in Aberdeen. The traditional parties have kind of left the city behind in many respects. If you are one of those disenfranchised Labour voters who are spitting feathers now that they've jumped into bed with the Tories and had the audacity to come back standing under a Labour banner, then Alba Party are a left-wing alternative that can provide answers that you might want on housing, independence and just common sense on women's rights.
Thank you very much, Robert. Hector?
Yeah, if you vote for me on May the 5th, I'll be an honest, local, hardworking councillor, and I will be that super sub in the 80th minute with the hard work. Even if it goes to extra time, I'll put full effort in. Thanks
very much, Hector. And Lee, over to you, mate.
Standing on record and vision, we have leaflets going out, newsletters going out as we speak. Hopefully not right as we speak, not at this time of night, but we have newsletters going out right now outlining the things that I've been working on over the past 5 years. So I'm standing on my record of being a public servant for the people in Aberdeenshire, and I'm standing on the vision that we spoke about early on in terms of Alba's 5-point plan to tackle poverty and our commitment to independence. So you'll get somebody who's a champion for Aberdeenshire and a champion for independence.
Thank you very much, Lee. So that pretty much draws a close this evening to the Tweet Street Alba Youth Future Scotland's Now podcast. Good, right. So what we'll do is we'll just get everybody to say good night.
Thank you for inviting me along. It's exciting to be here now with all of our other Alba Party candidates, young candidates. We've got a great team, we've got great talent, and I'm sure we'll have an incredibly successful election on the 5th of May. Good night.
Hector?
Yeah, thanks for inviting me along. I've really enjoyed it. I think we're in company of some really good candidates, and as Lee said, I think we've got a strong chance on May the 5th. Good night.
Thanks for having me along. I think Alba Party is in good stead, and I think May elections, if we get out there and put the hard graft in, put our message out there and get people to understand it, I think we're in for a good elections in May. Thanks.
Thank you.
Yep, no, thanks again for inviting me along. You know, we've got a great message, you know, with Alba, and some fantastic points. So let's get out there, let's get the message across to people, and let's have a very good May. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Thanks.
Thank you very much for having me on. And I think we have got a fantastic team of candidates, not just the candidates here, but the candidates in the rest of Alba as well. And I think Alba are going to do really well in this year's elections.
Thank you very much. And from Tweet Street, I have to say thanks to everybody for taking their own time out to come here and put a message out. It'll be good to get that message out to a wider audience. So it's a case of trying to share and grow. But I'm, like Craig had said earlier, I am delighted with what he's presented this evening, the effort that he's putting in. It's put Scotland in safe hands with people like you. So please keep doing what you're doing, and you'll have people for the older side try to put out messages and back you up wherever we can. Good luck on the 5th of May, and it's just for me to say, please vote Alba on the 5th of May. These are some of the offerings, and it'll put us in a good place. Thanks very much for Tweet Street, and good night.